Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to continue in our reading of the BFG. And when we last left off, Sophie was being carried around the cave by the BFG and looking at all his dream jars. And she was reading some of the really funny dreams that were on there. And interestingly enough, a lot of them involved teachers and principals and some things that students would dream about teachers and what they would do. So just thinking about this, if you could create like a funny dream involving your teacher or your principal, what would that look like? Maybe sometime today, if you want to write a funny story like we read, and these are like the labels that would be on the dream jars. Usually when we are teaching this novel in our class, we let kids create labels for jars of what would be inside the jar. And some of them are really, really funny. So maybe if you have one and you want to write it, and you can let your parents email it to me, and then I can share it when I read next to you guys. My email is Melissa, MELISA, .Phillips, PHILLIPS, at mnps.org. And I would love to share some of your funny dreams that you would write and create to put on a jar. So we're going to start today. And the title of the chapter today is called The Great Plan. And we're going to find that Sophie, in realizing the gift that the giant has in being able to catch these dreams and manipulate and use these dreams in certain ways, is going to come up with a really, really awesome plan. So here we go. The Great Plan. "We've absolutely got to stop them," Sophie cried. "Put me back in your pocket quick and we'll chase after them and warn everyone in England that they're coming." Now remember, in the last chapter also, the very last thing that happened is Sophie and the BFG heard the noise of all the great giants, and they're running off like they do every night to gobble up human beings. And of course, we know it's human beings, but the giants aren't very educated, so they call them human beings. And the last scary thing that they said was they were going off to England, which is where Sophie's from. "Redunculous and impossible," the BFG said. "They is going 2 times as fast as me, and they is finishing their guzzle before we is halfway." "But we can't just sit here and do nothing," Sophie cried. "How many boys and girls are they going to eat tonight?" "Many," the BFG said. "The flesh lump eating giant alone has a most squackling whoopsie appetite." "Will he catch them out of their beds while they're sleeping?" "Like peas out of a pottle," the BFG said. "I can't bear to think of it," Sophie cried. "Then don't," the BFG said. "For years and years I is sitting here on this very rock, every night after night, when they is galloping away, and I is feeling so sad for all the human beings they is going to gobble up. But I has had to get used to it. There's nothing I can do. If I wasn't a titchy little runty giant, only 24 feet high, then I would be stopping them. But that is absolutely out of the window." "Do you always know where they're going?" Sophie asked. "Always," the BFG said. "Every night they is yelling at me as they go boodling past. The other day they was yelling, 'We is off to Mrs. Sippy and Mrs. Souris to guzzle them both.'" "Disgusting," Sophie said. "I hate them." She and the big friendly giant sat quietly side by side on the blue rock in the gathering dusk. Sophie had never felt so helpless in her life. After a while, she stood up and cried out, "I can't stand it. Just think of those poor girls and boys who are going to be eaten alive in just a few hours. We can't just sit here and do nothing. We've got to go after those brutes." Here's a picture of Sophie. See, there she is on the rock, and the BFG trying to think about what they could do. "No," the BFG said. But we must, Sophie cried. Why won't you go? The BFG sighed and shook his head firmly. I has told you 5 or 6 times, he said, and the third will be the last. I is never showing myself to human beings. Why not ever? If I do, they'll be putting me in a zoo with all those jiggy raffs and caterpillars. Nonsense, Sophie said. And they will be sending you straight back to the orphanage, the BFG went on. Grown-up human beings is not famous for their kindness. They is all squiffle rotters and gring sludgers. That simply is not true, Sophie cried angrily. Some of them are very kind indeed. Who? The BFG said. Name one. The Queen of England, Sophie said. You can't call her a squiffle rotter or a grinkle sludger. Well, the BFG said, you can't call her a squip peak or not much either, Sophie said, getting angrier and angrier. The flesh lump eater is longing dearly to guzzle her up, the BFG said, smiling a little now. Who, the Queen? Sophie cried aghast. Yes, the BFG answered. Flesh lump eater says he is never eating a queen, and he thinks perhaps she has an especially scrumdiddlyumptious flavor. Sorry, my phone. How dare he, Sophie cried. But Flesh Lump Eater says there's too many soldiers around her palace, and he dursn't try it. He'd better not, Sophie said. He is also saying he would like very much to guzzle one of them soldiers in his pretty red suit, but he's worried about those big black furry hats they is wearing. He thinks they might be sticking in his throat. If you've ever seen any pictures of the in England where the Queen lives, or they have these special guards that guard all the palaces and residences of where the royalty live. And they wear these big red coats and these really tall black furry hats. They're really famous too. I hope he chokes, Sophie said. Flesh Lump Eater is a very careful giant, the BFG said. Sophie was silent for a few moments, and then suddenly, in a voice filled with excitement, she cried out, I've got it! By golly, I think I've got it! Got what? Asked the BFG. The answer, cried Sophie. We'll go to the Queen. It's a terrific idea. If I went and told the Queen about these disgusting man-eating giants, I'm sure she'd do something about it. The BFG looked down at her sadly and shook his head. She is never believing you, he said. Never in a month of Mondays. I think she would. Never, the BFG said. It is sounding such a wonky tall story. The Queen will be laughing and saying, what awful rub squash. She would not. Of course she would, the BFG said. I has told you before that human beings is simply not believing in giants. Then it is up to us to find a way of making her believe, and then Sophie said. And how is you getting in to see the Queen anyway? The BFG asked. Now hold on a sec, Sophie said. Just you hold on a second, because I've got another idea. Your ideas is full of crodswaddle, the BFG said. Not this one, Sophie said. You say that if we tell the Queen, she will never believe us. I is certain she wouldn't, the BFG said. But we aren't going to tell her, Sophie said excitedly. We don't have to tell her. We'll make her dream it. That is an even more froth-bungling suggestion, the BFG said. Dreams is lots of fun, but nobody's believing in dreams either. You's only believing in a dream while you is actually dreaming it. But as soon as you is waking up, you is saying, oh, thank goodness it was only a dream. Don't you worry about that part of it, Sophie said. I can fix that. Never can you fix it, the BFG said. I can, I swear I can. But first of all, let me ask you a very important question. Here it is. Can you make a person dream absolutely anything in the world? Anything you like, the BFG said proudly. If I said I wanted to dream that I was in a flying bathtub with silver wings, could you make me dream it? I could, the BFG said. But how? Sophie said. You obviously don't have exactly that dream in your collection. I do not, the BFG said, but I could be mixing it up. How could you mix it up? It is a little bit like mixing a cake, the BFG said. If you was putting the right amount of all the different things into it, you was making the cake come out any way you want. Sugary, spongy, curranty, Christmassy, or gropswitchy. It's the same with dreams. Go on, Sophie said. I has dillions of dreams on my shelves, right or left? Right, Sophie said. I has dreams about bathtubs, lots of them. I has dreams about silver wings. I has dreams about flying. So all I have to do is mix the dreams together in the proper way, and I is quickly making a dream where you is flying in a bathtub with silver wings. I see what you mean, Sophie said, but I didn't know that you could mix one dream with another. Dreams like being mixed, the BFG answered. They is getting very lonesome all by themselves in those glassy bottles. Right, Sophie said. Now then, do you have dreams about the Queen of England? Lots of them, the BFG said. And about giants? Of course, the BFG said. And about giants eating people? Swiggles of them, the BFG said. And about little girls like me? Those is the most commonest of all, the BFG said. I has bottles and bottles of dreams about little girls, and you can mix them all up just as I want you to. Sophie asked, getting more and more excited. Of course, the BFG said, but how is this helping us? I think you is barking up the wrong dog. Now hold on, Sophie said. Listen carefully. I want you to mix a dream which you will blow into the Queen of England's bedroom when she's asleep. And this is how it will go. Now hang on a minute, the BFG said. How is I possibly going to get near enough to the Queen of England's bedroom to blow in a dream? You is talking dumb silly. I'll tell you that later, Sophie said. For the moment, please listen carefully. Here's the dream I want you to mix. Are you paying attention? Very close, the BFG said. I want the Queen to dream that 9 disgusting giants, each one of them about 50 feet tall, are galloping to England in the night. She must dream their names as well. What are the names again? Flesh lump eater, the BFG said. Man hugger, bone cruncher, child chewer, meat dripper, gizzard gulper, maid masher, blood bottler, and the butcher boy. Let her dream all those names, Sophie said, and let her dream they'll be creeping into England in the depths of the witching hour and snatching little boys and girls from their beds. Let her dream that they will be reaching into the bedroom windows and pulling the little boys and girls out of their beds, and then, Sophie paused, do they eat them on the spot or do they carry them away first? She asked. They is usually just popping them straight into their mouth like popcorn, the BFG said. Put that in the dream, Sophie said, and then the dream must say that when their tummies are full, they'll go galloping back to giant country where no one can find them. Is that all? The BFG said. Certainly not, Sophie said. You must then explain to the Queen in the dream that there is a big friendly giant who can tell her where all those beasts are living, so that she can send her soldiers and armies to capture them once and for all. And now let her dream one last and very important thing. Let her dream there is a little girl called Sophie sitting on her windowsill who will tell her where the big friendly giant is hiding. Where is he hiding? Asked the BFG. We'll come to that later, Sophie said. So the Queen dreams her dream, right? Right, the BFG said. And then she wakes up and the first thing she thinks is, oh, what a horrible dream. I'm so glad it was only a dream. And then she looks up from her pillow and what does she see? What does she see? The BFG asked. She sees a little girl called Sophie sitting on a windowsill right there in real life before her very eyes. How is you going to be sitting on the Queen's windowsill, may I beg? the BFG said. You was going to put me there, Sophie said. And that's the lovely part about it. If someone dreams that there's a little girl on a windowsill, and then she wakes up and sees that little girl is really sitting on the windowsill, then that's a dream come true, is it not? I was beginning to see where you is driving to, the BFG said. If the Queen is knowing that part of her dream is true, then perhaps she's believing the rest of it is true as well. That's about it, Sophie said, but I shall have to convince her of that myself. You said you was wanting the dream to say there's a big friendly giant who's going to talk to the Queen. Absolutely, Sophie said. You must. You're the only one who can tell her where to find the other giants. How is I meeting the Queen? Asked the BFG. I's not wanting to be shooted at by her soldiers. The soldiers are only in the front of the palace, Sophie said, and in the back there's a huge garden, and there's no soldiers in there at all. There's a very high wall with spikes on it in the garden to stop people climbing in, but you could simply just walk right over that. How is you knowing all this about the Queen's palace? The BFG asked. Last year I was in a different orphanage, Sophie said. It was in London, and we used to go for walks all around. Is you helping me to find this palace? The BFG asked. I has never dared to go hiding, sneaking around London in my life. I'll show you the way, Sophie said confidently. I is frightened of London, the BFG said. Don't be, Sophie said. It's full of tiny dark streets, and there's very few people about in the witching hour. The BFG picked Sophie up between one finger and a thumb and placed her gently in the palm of the other hand. Is the Queen's palace very big? He asked. It's huge, Sophie said. Then how is we finding the right bedroom? That's up to you, Sophie said. You're supposed to be an expert at that sort of thing. And you is absolutely sure the Queen will not put me in the zoo with the caterpillars? Of course she won't, Sophie said. You'll be a hero. And you'll never have to eat snozzcumbers again. Sophie saw the BFG's eyes widen. He licked his lips. You mean it? He said. You really mean it? No more disgustive snozzcumbers? You couldn't get one if you wanted one, Sophie said. Humans don't grow them. That did it. The BFG got to his feet. When is you wanting me to mix this special dream? He asked. Now, Sophie said, at once. When is we going to see the Queen? He said. Tonight, Sophie said, as soon as you've mixed the dream. Tonight? The BFG cried. Why such a flush-blunkling flurry? If we can't save tonight's children, we can anyway save tomorrow's, Sophie said. What is more, I'm getting famished. I haven't had a thing to eat for 24 hours. Then we is better get crackling, the BFG said, moving back toward the cave. Sophie kissed him on the tip of his thumb. I knew you could do it, she said. Come on, let's hurry. Mixing the dream. It was dark now, and the night had already begun. The BFG, with Sophie sitting on his hand, hurried into the cave and put on those brilliant blinding lights that seemed to come from nowhere. He placed Sophie on a table. Stay there, please, he said, and no chittering. I is needing to listen only to silence when I is missing up such a naughty, plexicated dream as this. He hurried away from her. He got out an enormous empty glass jar that was the size of a washing machine. He clutched it to his chest and hurried toward the shelves on which stood the thousands and thousands of smaller jars containing the captured dreams. Dreams about giants, he muttered to himself as he searched the labels. The giants is guzzling human beings. No, not that one. No, not that one. Here's one, and here's another. He grabbed the jars and unscrewed the tops. He took the dreams into the enormous jar he was clutching, and as each one went in, Sophie caught a glimpse of a small sea-green blob tumbling from one jar into the other. The BFG hurried towards another shelf. Now, he muttered, I is wanting dreams about giggle houses for girls and a boggle boxes for boys. He was becoming very tense now. Sophie could almost see the excitement bubbling inside him as he scurried back and forth among his beloved jars. There must have been about 50,000 dreams altogether up there on the shelves, but he seemed to know almost exactly where every one of them was. "Dreams about little girls," he muttered, "and dreams about me, about the BFG. Come on, hurry up, get on with it. Now where is the wonky world eyes keeping those?" Here's a picture of the BFG searching all of his jars. He's got so many. And so it went on. In about half an hour, the BFG had found all the dreams he wanted and had tipped them into one huge jar. He put the jar on the table. Sophie sat watching him, but said nothing. Inside the big jar, lying on the bottom of it, she could clearly see about 50 of those oval sea-green jelly-ish shapes, all pulsing gently in and out, some lying on top of the other, but each one still quite separate. "Now we is mixing them," the BFG announced. He went to the cupboard where he kept his bottles of frobscottle, and from it he took out a gigantic egg beater. It was one of those that had a handle which you turn, and down below there was a lot of overlapping blades that go whizzing around. He inserted the bottom end of his contraption into the big jar where the dreams were lying. "Watch," he said, and he started turning the handle very fast. And there he is with his egg beater, mixing up the dream while Sophie watches and look inside at all the different dreams he's got. That'd be pretty cool if you could make your own dreams. Flashes of green and blue exploded inside the jar. The dreams were being whisked into a sea green froth. "Those poor things," Sophie cried. "They is not feeling it," the BFG said as he turned the handles. "Dreams is not like human beings or animals. They has no brains. They is made of zazimoose." After about a minute, the BFG stopped whisking. The whole bottle was now full to the brim with large bubbles. They were almost exactly like the bubbles we ourselves blow from soapy water, except that these were even brighter and more beautiful colors swimming on their surfaces. "Keep watching," the BFG said. Quite slowly, the topmost bubble rose up through the neck of the jar and floated away. A second one followed, and then a third and a fourth. Soon the cave was filled with hundreds of beautifully colored bubbles, all drifting gently through the air. It was truly a wonderful sight. As Sophie watched them, they all started floating towards the cave entrance, which was still open. "They're going to get out," Sophie whispered. "Of course," the BFG said. "Where to?" "Those is all the little tiny dream bits that I isn't using," the BFG said. "They is going back to the misty country to join up with the proper dreams." "It's all a bit beyond me," Sophie said. "Dreams is full of mystery and magic," the BFG said. "Do not try to understand them. Look in the big bottle and you'll see that the dream you is wanting for the queen." Sophie turned and stared into the great jar. On the bottom of it, something was thrashing around wildly, bouncing up and down and flinging itself against the walls of the jar. "Good heavens!" she cried. "Is that it?" "That's it," the BFG said proudly. But it's horrible," Sophie cried. "It's jumping about. It wants to get out." "That's because it's a troggle humper," the BFG said. "It's a nightmare." "Oh, but I don't want you to give the queen a nightmare," Sophie cried. "Well, she's dreaming about giants guzzling up little boys and girls. Then what is you expecting it except a nightmare?" the BFG said. "Oh, no," Sophie cried. "Oh, yes," the BFG said. "A dream where you is seeing little chittlers being eaten is about the most frightsome troggle-humping dream you can get. It's a kicksy bog thumper. It's a wopsy grob switcher. It is all of them riddled into one. It's as bad dreams as I can blow into the flesh lump eater this afternoon. It's worse." Sophie stared down at the fearful nightmare dream that was still thrashing away in the huge glass jar. It was much larger than the others. It was about the size of the shape of, shall we say, a turkey's egg. It was jellyish, and it had the tinges of bright scarlet deep inside. Of course, he's talked before about the dreams that were troggle humpers were red in color. So that's what it looked like. There was something terrible about the way it was throwing itself against the sides of the jar. "I don't want to give the Queen a nightmare," Sophie said. "I was thinking," the BFG said, "that your Queen will be happy to have a nightmare, if having a nightmare is going to save a lot of human beings from being gobbled up from fearsome giants. Is I right or is I left?" "I suppose you're right," Sophie said. "It's got to be done." "She will soon be getting over it," the BFG said. "Have you put all the other important things into it?" Sophie asked. "When I is blowing that dream into the Queen's bedroom," the BFG said, "she will be dreaming every single little thing-a-lingy that you asked me to make her dream." "About me sitting on a windowsill?" "That part is very strong." "And about a big friendly giant?" "I is putting a nice long gobbet about him," the BFG said. As he spoke, he picked up one of the smaller jars and very quickly tipped the struggling, thrashing troggle-humper out of the large jar and into the small one, and then he screwed the lid tightly onto the small jar. "That's it," he announced. "We is now ready." He fetched his suitcase and put the small jar into it. "Why bother to take a great big suitcase when you've only got one jar?" Sophie said. "You could put that jar in your pocket." The BFG looked down at her and smiled. "By goggles," he said, taking the jar out of the suitcase, "your head is not quite so full of grind sludge after all. I can see you is not born last week." "Thank you, kind sir," Sophie said, making a little curtsy from the tabletop. "Is you ready to leave?" the BFG asked. "I'm ready," Sophie cried. Her heart was beginning to thump at the thought of what they were about to do. It really was a wild and crazy thing. Perhaps they would both be thrown into prison. The BFG was putting on his great black cloak. He tucked the jar into a pocket in his cloak, and he picked up the long trumpet-like dream blower. Then he turned and looked at Sophie, who was still on the tabletop. "The dream bottle is in my pocket," he said. "Is you going to sit in there with that during the travel?" "Never," cried Sophie. "I refuse to sit next to that beastly thing." "Then where is you going to sit?" the BFG asked her. Sophie looked him over for a few moments, and then she said, "If you would be kind enough to swivel one of your lovely big ears so that it's lying flat like a dish, that would make a very cozy place for me to sit." "By gumbo, that's a squackling good idea," the BFG said. Slowly he swiveled his huge right ear until it was like a great shell facing the heavens. He lifted Sophie up and placed her into it. The ear itself, which was about the size of a large tea tray, was full of the same channels and crinkles as a human ear. It was extremely comfortable. "I hope I don't fall down your ear hole," Sophie said, edging away from the large hole just beside her. "Be very careful not to do that," the BFG said. "You would be giving me a cronking earache." The nice thing about being there was that she could whisper directly into his ear. "You is tickling me a bit," the BFG said. "Please do not jiggle about." "I'll try not to," Sophie said. "Are we ready?" "Oh, wee!" yelled the BFG. "Don't do that." "I didn't do anything," Sophie said. "You is talking too loud. You is forgetting that I is hearing every little thing-a-ling-a-ling 50 times louder than usual, and there you is shouting away right inside my ear." "Oh gosh," Sophie murmured, "I forgot about that." "Your voice is sounding like thunder and trumpets." "I'm so sorry," Sophie whispered. "Is that better?" "No!" cried the BFG. "It sounds as though you was shooting off a blunderbuss." "Then how can I talk to you?" Sophie whispered. "Don't!" cried the poor BFG. "Please don't. Each word is like you dropping buzz bombs in my ear hole." Sophie tried speaking right under her breath. "Is this better?" she said. She spoke so softly she couldn't even hear her own voice. "That's better," the BFG said. "Now I is hearing you very nicely. What is it you is trying to say to me just now?" "I was saying, are we ready?" "We is off," cried the BFG, heading for the cave entrance. "We is off to meet Her Magister the Queen." Outside the cave, he rolled the large round stone back into place and set off at a tremendous gallop. And we will stop there, and when we pick up next, we'll find out if they make it to London. Do they successfully get to the Queen's palace without being caught? And what about that dream that they're trying to blow into the Queen's ear? Do you think that's going to work? I hope you enjoy this beautiful day outside today, and we will read some more tomorrow. Have a great one.